The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good day to everyone, and thank you all for taking a little bit of time out of your day to join us here at ManageEngine for a discussion about GDPR. And I think that for all of us really around the world in IT, GDPR is going to be something that is a hurdle that we have to get over. And I think that preparing is the best thing that we can do at this point in all aspects. And preparing means that we have to understand GDPR, and we have to make sure that we have everything in place by the time next May comes around. So that's really what today is about. And it's really our pleasure to bring you some different information, hopefully getting you all the information possible with preparing and then executing GDPR. A little bit of housekeeping before we jump into the material. First of all, this is being recorded, so if there's anyone at the office that maybe couldn't attend or someone that you want to share this information with afterwards, you should be receiving an email with a link to the recording in the next couple of days, so keep an eye out for that. Secondly, I am not the only person from the ADSolutions team here on the webinar. There are quite a few people in the background helping with questions, and really the goal is for us to not only present information to you, but if you have any questions as we're going through, whether it be directly related to the material or really anything in general about GDPR, please use your GoToWebinar question on your panel, and the team will answer as I'm going through the material. So please take advantage of that whenever possible. And I do want to also offer up our email address. I have an email address for me on this page, and towards the end I'll have some more email addresses. Really the goal of the email address is we're here for you. We all have dealt with compliance regulations in some way, and there's always a lot of questions around them, and hopefully as you go through your preparation, if there's any way that we can help, that is our main goal. So please take advantage of us as a resource. So let's just jump into the material here. You know, the General Data Protection Regulation has a lot of differences compared to other compliance regulations. And really when it comes to GDPR, GDPR is all about personal information. And what I want to do is I want to walk you through three different key aspects for GDPR. One is preparing for it. One is how you're going to protect the data, and what does GDPR say about protecting the data, not just securing the data, but from all angles. And there's a lot of different things that you've got to consider with GDPR. And then finally, how do you comply with GDPR? And then I really, what I want to do in that last bullet is not just talk about compliance, because that's something you can read about, but what I want to do is give you some guidelines on how you can start now to be ready for next May when it comes around. So when you start preparing for GDPR, I think now is the time. And the reason now is the time is if there is a breach for personal information and you did not take the efforts, the cost is extremely severe. 20 million euro or 4% of gross profit, whichever one is bigger. And that's a huge problem when you have the time now. And I'm so thankful you guys took the time to come listen to us and start to gather your information about how to be compliant with GDPR, because these numbers are quite staggering, but it's really a testament to the compliance regulation and the owners to say, this is important and we're going to take measures to do that. So how do you prepare? Well, I think you need to understand the ground rules. There are some things that have changed over time with regard to GDPR and loosened up, and some things have tightened up. So we need to understand the ground rules. And we have to make sure that we document the personal information, as well as store it correctly. So it's triaging, as I call it, and then also making sure that you get your ducks in a row, making sure that you know where this personal information is. And there's something called the accountability factor, which we'll go over as well. So what are these ground rules? Well, there are two terms that when I was starting to learn about GDPR were a little bit confusing to me, and I want to make sure that I understood them completely, and that's personal data and processing. Because as you read through, you see these certain terms, and you have to have a good understanding of what they are in order to understand what you're reading. So first of all, I want to define personal data and then also processing. And then there's this idea of consent, which is extremely important too. But what does personal data mean? Now, as I go through these slides and this information, I'm going to weave in and out of GDPR terminology as well as kind of ManageEngine interpretation terminology. And the reason for that is, in some areas, I think it's extremely important to keep to the letter of the law, and that is to make sure we follow what GDPR says. Now, personal data, according to GDPR, and I'm quoting here, is any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person, and that's a data subject. So we actually have two different terms here, data subject and personal data. So the way that I look at that is really a human, right, a natural person, and information relating to them. So really this is the tie between the human and the data that really is related to that person. Now, what are identifiers, right? So if they can be identified, what are identifiers? Well, it can be their name, parts of their name, right? An identification number, social security number, some kind of a government number, location data, right? Online identifiers. So now we're getting into online information. So for me, at Derek Melber is my Twitter. And then there's even more. And so you get into this last bullet point, and it kind of gets into some confusing aspects. But really what they're trying to say is, all right, if anything can be tied back to that natural person, that data subject, that's an identifier. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to make sure that we're protecting the integrity of the data subject, the natural person, because there's a lot of different ways that people can track back to that person. So this personal data is really what we're going after in terms of protecting, and what GDPR is really all about. Now, we not only have personal data, which is the information, we also have processing of that information. Okay, again, this is kind of verbatim. Any operation or set of operations which is performed on personal data or sets of personal data. So this says, all right, if you are taking the personal data and really doing anything with it, so that's a process, right? So we are processing the personal information. Now, this can be manual or automated, so now they're trying to encompass anything that can be done related to this information that you have. And then they give you a long list of what processing could include. So you see collecting the information, recording the information, organizing, structuring, manipulating the information, the storage, which we have to get into in order to secure it, right? Adapting, altering, this would be maybe the analyzing of the information, right? Retrieving the information, right? So as we go through any of these processes, you have to consider it's more than just one piece. It's really anything related to that information. Once you've obtained the information, touching it, manipulating it, doing anything with that information is what GDPR calls processing. Now, those are the definitions of really the data and the people, right? The data subjects that we're talking about. Now, in order for you to meet GDPR, you have this concept of consent. Now, consent is extremely important in GDPR, and if you've read through GDPR, you see there's an entire section on consent, and then things tie between consent. So consent, again, I'm going to quote here, this is pulled directly from GDPR. of the data subject, so the human, means freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous identification or indication of the person wanting to give up their information. So this is basically saying, all right, you have to clearly indicate to the person that you want to get their information, and they have to agree to that, okay? By clear affirmative action, all right? So this is a little different, and I've been trying to read up a little bit more on this, on the directive versus GDPR. And the directive is a little more wishy-washy, which is why GDPR is so important. Because the directive really didn't go into a lot of detail with this, but GDPR does. And it's doing that in order to protect the person and their information. Because really what GDPR is doing is it's associating the human with their personal information and saying it's one and the same. So they're trying to protect the person by protecting their information, because of course in the digital age that we live in, it's really easy to relate back to that human. So this idea of consent means that it has to be very specific, very clear, that the human is saying, yes, I agree to the processing of personal information. Okay? Now, this kind of goes into that idea that I was talking about, what I've been digging into with the directive versus GDPR. A directive was left open on the possibility of the opt-out consent. So in essence, if you didn't opt out, it was considered opting in. That didn't fly, okay? So I pulled some things out of GDPR to try to give you a little bit better idea of what this means with consent. It should be easy to withdraw consent as it is to give, right? So if it's really easy for someone to give information, it should be just as easy and just as clear for them to opt out. Now, this idea of clarity is really spelled out and clearly distinguishable in GDPR in the actual terms that it's saying. And then it moves on and says, in an intelligible and easy accessible form using clear and plain language. So you can't like hide it in the fine text. You can't like have it fly by real quick. This has to be very clear in order for you to use their information and be able to manipulate their information. So this idea of consent becomes very important. Now, I, as someone that has been dealing with different compliance regulations and auditors over the years, I'm going to guess, because no one really knows, this idea of consent is really going to be important when it comes down to next May and when the rubber hits the road. So what I would do if I were you is I would start to make sure that this idea of consent is very clear, because what you don't want is you don't want someone to be able to come back, right, a data subject to human, and say, whoa, it wasn't very clear. So you're going to have to prove that you showed consent, allowing them to easily see that they were agreeing to the information that they were providing to you and that they were agreeing that you can use it, okay? So I just think, based on what I've seen with HIPAA, with Sarbanes-Oxley, PCI, all these other compliance regulations, this seems to be one of those areas that I think is going to be very important with GDPR based on the amount of emphasis they're putting on it in the directives, okay? Now, this last piece of kind of understanding the foundation of GDPR is accountability. Now, what I did is I went through and I pulled out the exact language. And then what I wanted to do is I wanted to highlight some things to make sure that you see what they're really focusing on. So that's what we have in orange here, right? So instead of just reading through the bullets, let's talk about these key facts, right? So we want to make sure that data is processed lawfully and in a transparent manner, right? What you don't want to do is try to manipulate this data in a way that isn't clear, right? So we want to make sure that what you're doing is in the open, okay? Data should not go further than what the purpose is. So the idea is, if you're trying to get information about birthdays, Well, you shouldn't be getting information beyond that. So whatever the purpose is, right? The specified, explicit, and legitimate purpose, and no further processed in a manner that is incompatible with those purposes. So the idea is if you say, okay, you're consenting to XYZ, well, don't take the data and manipulate it in an ABC manner, okay? Along with that is data minimization. This means that you should be obtaining the information only for what you want. I mean, we all know that there's 1,000 bullet points for each data subject. If you only need 4, then collect 4. Don't collect 20 and go, well, I might use this later, because it goes down to this consent. It goes down to what you're going to be using the information for. Want to make sure the data is accurate and kept up to date. So depending on how you're using the data and whatnot, right, you want to make sure that what you're doing is correct. So if you collected data in year 1 and it's year 2, and that data could have changed, right? Someone's birthday is not going to change. But if the data can change, well, you need to get updated information, and you have to prove that you are trying to keep that data updated, okay? When you have data, oops, said my audio was lost. Sorry about that. So now we're on our 5th bullet point. So when you have data, you need to make sure that your data is kept only for the time that it needs to be kept, right? So if you're going to have the data for a project, when you're done with the data, purge the data. That's what they're saying. Don't keep it for longer than what the purpose is. Finally, we get into security. This is really where I think they want GDPR to be, but there's a lot of other things that are tangential to GDPR, which is very important, right? Only collect what you want. Don't do anything with it beyond that. But also, once you have it, secure it. And this particular point goes into a lot of different things, right? It gets into the legality of it, right? Protection against unauthorized and unlawful processing and against accidental loss, destruction, and damage. The idea is you now are protecting a human, protected as if it's a human. Their information relates back to them, protect it. And that's really what GDPR is talking about with accountability. Now, beyond the basics, now we have to protect that information. And GDPR goes into a lot of areas on how you should protect this information. Sorry about this. It says that my audio is up and down. So hopefully if you guys hear some audio issues, please let me know. I don't know if it's on my end or yours, so I apologize for that with that. So hold on one second. I'm going to take 2 seconds here. All right, hold on one second and I'll be back with you. I'm just making sure that I'm not and all right, until I hear anything different, everything on my end looks pretty good. So anyway, so with regard to personal data, we need to protect it. So the idea is that we need to look at the technical aspects of protecting the data. And then beyond that, if we're breached, oh gosh, what happens at that point? So let's first of all talk about the security aspects, okay? Now, organizing and securing the information means first we need to identify it, okay? So we need to identify the existing data. Then we need to isolate it. So what I find is that the information that you have on your network has to be again, I'm going to use the word triage. You have to find it. Once you find it, you determine, okay, is this personal data or not? If it is, then you're going to want to put it in a bucket, okay? So you want to isolate the personal data as you go through, okay? So this is an important aspect of this. What you don't want is you don't want information on your network to be interwoven, because as we get into some further things, you're going to want to separate out personal data from rest of the information that you have, because you do not want to have to take measures on setting permissions at a certain degree, auditing, breach detection on everything. You just want it on your personal data. So that's why we want to isolate it. And then GDPR says encryption of the personal data as well. Now, once you've, okay, so let's just kind of use normal terms here. All right, so I'm going to find my information. Once I find the information, I'm going to put it in a certain location. Once I put it in that certain location, I'm going to encrypt it to make sure it's secured. Then, not only am I going to encrypt it, I'm going to set permissions, access control lists on it to make sure that only the right people have access to it. All right, now that I have the information in a bucket and the bucket is encrypted and secured, now I need to make sure as we go over time that it's kept secure. So we're going to track by auditing the access, and we're going to make sure that it remains confidential, the integrity is there, and it's available. So now we have this mental picture of all the information on our network. We have a bucket of information. That bucket of information is extremely secured, and we're making sure that it's secured. Now, if for some reason that bucket gets destroyed, we have to be able to restore the information that's in the bucket to a level of confidence that we know that it's correct information. So now we kind of go back to this idea that the information must be correct, okay? So now we have this information in one location, we're tracking it, and we're making sure that we know who's accessing that information. This is really, in my opinion, what you have to put in place. You have to put in place not only the organization of the information, but everything else after you've organized it. Because what you're going to have to do with GDPR is make sure that the information is correct and minimal and in place, okay? So let's talk about some more concepts that are specific to GDPR. One of them, we'll go to the second bullet point, data minimization. We've already kind of talked about that, but it was so important I want to mention it twice, okay? So this pseudonymization, I think I said that right. It's a tough word. That's probably one of the biggest words I've ever said, is the idea that the processing of personal data should be in such a way that it can no longer be attributed back to the person. So as you're going through, you shouldn't be able to take the data and say, oh, that's Bob or that's Sally, okay? So you shouldn't be able to do that, okay? This is, again, is exact terminology from GDPR. So pseudonymization is the idea that you can separate the data from the human, okay? Now, if we go beyond that concept, right, you need to be able to regularly test your security measures. So you're going to have to make sure, just like you do with data backup, right? I mean, a backup is good, but you got to make sure you can restore it. So you have these tests. The same with security. You're going to have to make sure and verify over time that your security is in place, okay? So we want the separation of the data and the human. We want to have as little information as possible to get our job done, and we need to make sure that the data that we have is secured. And we want to do that because we need to make sure we worry about breaches. Now, breaches inside of GDPR is pretty prolific. It's talked about a lot, okay? Now, the idea of breaches, and this is where we have to take not just the terminology, but we have to interpret the terminology. You're going to have to deploy a solution for tracking and manipulating data for data breaches, okay? This is for your databases as well as your files and folders, because your data is going to be stored either in direct files and folders or in databases. And you're going to have to make sure that you keep the integrity of those files in place. This is that whole concept of tracking, monitoring, alerting, and detecting breaches. It's all of that in one, okay? Now, if you don't do this, you're going to be penalized. But if you do this and are still breached, according to GDPR, you're not going to be penalized. But you're going to have to prove that you had all this in place, okay? So if the breach could have been prevented, right? If you didn't bucketize or isolate your information and secure it, well, then you didn't really take the measures, right? If you're not tracking it, if you didn't even know what was going on, and you could have stopped someone from the breach because you didn't track group membership changes, well, you're going to get penalized. So you have to take the minimum measures, which is why we're going over this, to not get penalized. So really what GDPR is in written form, and who knows what it's going to be when it comes out. In written form, GDPR says, hey, we understand that technology and security can only go so far. If we could secure everything, then we wouldn't need GDPR. But what they're saying is you have to have your ducks in a row. You have to have the technology in place. Otherwise, you're going to get fined. But if you did have everything in place and you were still breached, gosh, someone did something beyond what we put in place, so we can't penalize you for that. That's important to understand because these penalties are extreme. Now, what if you are breached? According to GDPR, you're going to have to gather the information so you could submit it in a report. So you're going to have to get all the events related to the breach and put them into a report. You're going to have to notify the supervisory authority in 72 hours. So you have to act fast. This can't be, oh, I was on holiday for 4 days. I came back and noticed the breach, so I'm going to do it now. No, that is not what this is about. You're going to have to be able to dig in and describe the nature of the breach. You're going to have to provide information about who to contact if the supervisory authority needs to come back and get more information. You're going to have to determine, based on the breach, what the consequences were. Was data manipulated? Was data modified? Was it deleted? Was it copied? Who knows? You're going to have to go through that and put it in these reports, right? So then you're going to have to describe the measures that were taken, right, to address the problem, right? What did you do? Did you put more security in place? Did you isolate better? Did you put a different SIM in place? Did you put alerting in place? What did you do to help mitigate this for future, right? So you're going to have to, in these reports, be pretty thorough. Go from what happened in the past all the way to what you're going to do in the future, and then in between, you're going to have to put that information in the report, okay? Again, I will iterate. Our interpretation of GDPR is if you put the things in place, if you are breached, you're not going to be fined. So how do you comply with GDPR? We understand now the terms. We understand kind of the rules of engagement, some of the concepts. But how do you put this in place? Well, you're going to have to track and report changes of groups that are related to the data and the access to the information that you're gathering. So if a group membership changes, you have to be notified of that in real time. If an access control list changes on a file folder or the database that you're storing the information in, you need to be told that immediately, okay? You need to be able to have historical information about access to this data so that you can, if there is a breach, go back in. You also, and I'm going to take a more proactive view of this. If you are being told of the access and the changes to the access, you can, in most cases, prevent normal breaches. But in reality, you can't stop every breach. Like I said, if we could do that, then everyone around the world would be doing that. So you're going to have to detect breaches. You need software in place to detect breaches, and you're going to be able to take post-breach breach actions, right? How are you going to do this? Well, let me just give you some ideas of how you're going to do this, okay? Now, different solutions require different implementation. I'm going to show you about AD Manager and ADAudit and how they deal with the setup, okay? Now, I'm first of all going to go into an actual live environment. And with this, and we're going to talk first of all about just about Windows, okay? But this is a broad sweep, okay? You're going to have to go into whatever technology your information is stored in, right? Whether it be in a Unix environment, could be a Windows environment, whatever, and you're going to have to set up tracking. Now, let me show you what it looks like in a Windows environment. If I come into a Windows environment, this is Active Directory group policy, you're going to have to set up something called auditing in Windows. Now, it may be called something else in another operating system, right? I don't know every operating system, but you're going to have to set this up. Now, inside of Windows, there are things called the audit policy, and you'll see here that I have this set up. So the success and failure tracking this behavior. So you see here object access is file, folder, and database. Account would be your groups. So you have to go into the operating system and tell it to start tracking information. Once you have the information being tracked, you have to know where to go in order to see the information. So inside of Windows, you have something called Event Viewer. And in Event Viewer, you have the security log. Now you'll see here that I have 150,000 events. This log is constantly being overwritten. So you have to have in place some way to be told when things are changing. Now, unfortunately, Microsoft doesn't have anything in here in Event Viewer to do that for you. So you're going to have to come up, especially in Windows, with another solution around this. You have to have a SIM. You have to have something that is reporting, tracking, and alerting you on this. Now, let me show you the power of a tool like ADAudit Plus. ADAudit Plus allows me to do all of this. And when I say all of this, first, run reports, right? Let's look at groups. So my groups, when they are modified, I'm going to be able to see, run reports, get full information about which group was modified, what was modified, when, by whom, and all the details. So this is important for if you are breached. It's also important, and I want to stress this, that you need to be notified of the change so that you can stop the breach. Now, what does the notification look like? Well, inside of ADAudit Plus, there's things called alerts. Now, instead of showing you the boring setup of the alert, let me show you the end result of the alert. So if someone goes into Active Directory users and computers, and someone modifies a group which has access to information that you are trying to protect with GDPR, and the group membership changes, right? Right, so enterprise admins, this is a group that you're tracking. If someone is added to this, right? So Bart is added to this group. You need to receive a real-time alert on that. Notice right here, this is an alert telling you, warning, something changed. You not only need this in a dashboard alert, but you also need to have, and I'm going to show you the alert now, but I'm going to show you one specific aspect of it, the ability to email you. No one on this webinar has time to look at the dashboard all the time, but we always look at our email. So we, as the people in charge of GDPR, need to be notified when groups change membership, also when files are accessed. Now, we need to know when the files are modified, We also need to know when the permissions change. So we need to have the ability to go in and look at details around the information that we are protecting. So it's a multitude of things. Let me break it down one more time for you. When you have data, groups of users have access to the data. You need to be able to run reports and get alerts on when those groups change membership. Because the data is itself being protected, you need to be able to run reports of when files were modified and get alerts on those down to the detail, as well as when the permissions change on the files, folders, and the database itself. That is one of the core things of GDPR, tracking, reporting, and alerting on group changes and ACL changes, on data access, okay? So you need to set up the ability to track it and then track it, but go beyond tracking, and part of it is this alerting, okay? Now, GDPR is a compliance regulation. I've been talking about compliance regulations for about 15 years. I always encourage the people that are in charge of the regulation to go beyond by making sure that you have these things set up so you can stop something before you're breached. Because breaches are hard to determine. Now, again, it's your responsibility to detect data breaches. Now, we have a tool called Log360. Log360 includes ADAudit Plus, as well as Log360 includes EventLog Analyzer. Now, with regard to, let me log in again here, EventLog Analyzer, this is where you're going to be able to set up for your data breaches. ADAudit Plus isn't going to show you data breaches. EventLog Analyzer is. But you're going to use the two together in a Windows environment to help create the document that you need to submit if you are breached. Now, obviously, if you have data stored somewhere, you're going to have to go in and you're going to have to add the device that has the data stored on it. That seems pretty obvious, right? So that's what you do here. You also need to go in and you need to, once you have the device set up, you need to add the sources on that device where the data is stored. Now, here what's important is you're going to specify what type of data source it is, right? Is it an Oracle database? Is it SQL Server? And you're going to have to go in, choose the existing device, choose the application type so that EventLog Analyzer knows what it's looking at. Because once it knows what it's looking at, it can go into those logs and it can gather information from those logs. And you'll see here that it's gathering the information from the sources, making sure that it's looking for certain bits and pieces. Okay? Now, once I have the information being brought into a tool like EventLog Analyzer, now what I can do is I can look at reports, and I can also get alerts. So I'm going to show you that in just a minute, of when I'm being attacked. So I need to be able to go in and I need to be able to look at when I'm being attacked, and I have to get the detailed information. So this is what you're going to have to provide in that report. Okay, this is an indication of a breach, right? This is a SQL injection. And this is the information that I obtained from that SQL injection. So this is something that I now can generate a report on. And right here is the command that was made to do the SQL injection. Okay? So what I need is I need this information. Now, what I can do is if this is on a Windows machine, I can go back to ADAudit Plus and I can track down that information. That's why depending on where the information is stored, you need to get the other information. That's why I was showing you that. So this is where you're going to have to be the detective gathering this information, but you need the tools in place in order to gather it and be able to see what's going on. Okay? Now, the other thing that I highly suggest, who has time to go in and look at these reports, right? You don't have time to do this. So what you need in place is you need alerts. Now, very similar to what I showed you with the group change alert, inside of the EventLog Analyzer, all of the Log360 tools have alerts as well. So the idea is I want to be able to send out alerts, alerting the GDPR team of when something goes on. So here you can see that I have the SQL injection alerts and I have the firewall rule alert, because you need to detect breaches from all areas where people are trying to get into that data. So it's a layering effect of security, and it's a reporting effect of those layers. So you're going to have to determine that, and you have to get down to the details. You need the activity information, because you're going to have to report back what are the consequences, what was the breadth, right? So you need to be able to go in and look at all of this information to make sure that you know when things are breached. Now, one more thing that I want to add in is this whole idea of incident management. That was one of the key aspects of the incident report. What's the future? Okay, how did you deal with it? So that's why we inside of EventLog Analyzer have the ability to look at incidents in a tracking tool. Okay, so Service Desk, ServiceNow, we have both of them. So when the alert pops up, you're going to be able to push that through the incident management system so you can raise it up immediately and then have it cleared off. And that's something you're going to want to put in that report as well. So when you get to the breach, things get pretty hairy, right? I mean, it gets to be something that you're going to have to build these reports. You're going to have to put all the analysis in there, and you need a tool that can help you do that. And it's going to be potentially more than one tool, which is why we have Log360. You may have to go into a couple of different tools, gathering the information you need to put into that report. So this idea of alerting, I want to bring to the surface, because it isn't always clear in a compliance regulation the importance of being informed in real time. I think that it is. I usually come from the administrative standpoint of things instead of the, oh gosh, we've now been breached standpoint. If I can be alerted on all the critical areas surrounding that data, I can take action before a breach occurs. And I don't want to be breached. I don't want to have to write these reports. I want to be able to say, oh my gosh, someone's trying to get in, or someone incorrectly gained access to data. I want to take action on it. ADAudit Plus and EventLog Analyzer both provide this level of alerting through emails to alert you in real time of when things are going on, so you can take immediate action, hopefully preventing the breach. But if you are breached, again, you want to be notified on the breach immediately too. So what we've done in this short amount of time is we've kind of gone over some foundational concepts. Obviously, there's no way in a webinar like this to go over all the concepts, but we tried to highlight some of those things related to the definitions of what processing is, what data is, and how you are going to get that. We also talked about some of the GDPR specifics, minimization, making sure you separate data from the human whenever possible, especially when you're processing that data. The storage, the security of that data. Once you've isolated the data and secured the data, now you have to put something around it, such as a SIM, to make sure that you are tracking it. And you want real-time reports. You need historical reporting as well. So now you need a tool that is going to help you see when security changes around that data. That's where you have ADAudit Plus and you have EventLog Analyzer. And I showed you both of those tools and what the reports look like, as well as what those alerts look like in real time. And I actually showed you a real-time alert of a group changing membership and how quick that is. That's the type of response that you can have when you have the right tool in place. So where do you go from here? Well, my suggestion is that you go and you download ADAudit Plus and EventLog Analyzer, because we give you a free trial. You need to play with this stuff now. You need to see what's going to happen when something happens so that when May comes, you already have things in place. So get a sim in place. Get an alerting tool in place so that you know what to expect. Do some trial runs. Put ADAudit Plus and EventLog Analyzer in place, and then put a team in place that's going to cause a breach, and you're going to have a reaction to it. And then write a report on it to make sure that everything is in place. What I always say is not planning, is planning to fail. Now is the time to plan for this. So I really hope that you got a lot out of this. We did go through quite a bit of information in the time we have together today. I did see quite a few questions come through. I want to thank you guys, first of all, asking the questions. That's very important for us to make sure that you're engaging. Also, I want to thank my team members for answering those questions. Here are a couple of emails that you can send any of your questions to. So as you're going through the preparation, let's say you download EventLog Analyzer and you have a question about the tool, email us. We'd be more than happy to walk you through any setups that you have to make sure that you're setting things up. EventLog Analyzer and ADAudit Plus are both super simple to download and set up. But again, you may run into a roadblock or you have a specific question. Please send us those questions. We want to hear from you to make sure that you are correctly prepared for GDPR when it comes down to needing to be prepared for GDPR by next year. So with that, I don't see any more questions coming through. Again, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your questions. I want to thank my team for helping me out with this. Without them, this couldn't be this successful of a webinar. I know we'll be having more of these in the upcoming months, so please keep an eye out for more of the ADSolutions webinars, both on GDPR and security. And I do see one more question. Let's see what that's about. So I just want to thank everyone for your time. And until next time, for myself and the rest of the ADSolutions team here at ManageEngine, thank you. Thank you for your time and have a great rest of your day.